You're listening to the Small Business Talk podcast with Cathy Smith. Episode 9.
Small Business Talk is a podcast for business owners and entrepreneurs who want a better way to run their businesses without spending years doing it the hard way. Small Business Talk is hosted by Cathy Smith, who has run the same marketing agency for more than 17 years and helped hundreds of business owners achieve their marketing goals.
Today, we are talking to special guest Jo Alilovic. Jo is the director of 3D HR Legal and the co-host of the Juggle podcast. As an employment lawyer for over 17 years, Jo has assisted employers grow and scale their business using her equity model. She helps them put in place the foundations needed for a solid employment relationship. Welcome, Jo. So, Jo, can you tell us why you would like to talk to the SPT community?
I have a couple of strings to my bow. Probably multiple, more than that. In fact, I'm sure everybody does. But the main reasons that I'm here are because of the fact that I'm an employment lawyer and I specialise in working with small businesses like your listeners, and I am a small business owner myself. So the work that I do with employers is I help them learn what it is that they're supposed to be doing when it comes to employing employees or working with contractors, helping them work out what they need to pay them, getting all their foundations in place, so making sure that they have appropriate contracts, policies and procedure documents, and also being a sounding board for them when they're feeling a little bit unsure or there's a bit of a problem that's arising in their workplace.
Excellent. What do you find are the biggest pitfalls that employers or prospective employers make when they go to start their first hire?
I think there is often a rushing in. There's so much that goes into the decision to have a first employee that sometimes people get to the point where they're like, right, I'm going to do it. And then all of a sudden they just sort of put an advert up there and they kind of throw themselves into it, going with the momentum and the excitement of the fact that they actually have decided to make this first hire. And they haven't actually properly planned what it is that they need.
What would you suggest is the 3 main things that they need to plan? Once they've decided they need somebody, what would be the 3 things that you would suggest that they start with?
Okay, the first thing would be a job description. So actually sitting down by themselves or with their partner, whoever it is that they have used as a sounding board, to say, what is it that this person that I'm going to hire is actually going to do? What I tend to find is that sometimes people will say to themselves, well, I'm just going to hire someone for a day a week because that's what I can afford. And then I'll just kind of make it up as I go along. I'm sure that once I've got someone sitting in the seat, I'll find work for them to do. But I think the risk is that if you take that attitude, you won't actually be mentally prepared to give them that work, or you might end up finding that they aren't the right person to do that kind of work. So very much the first thing is to have that job description. Once you have worked out the skills that they need, the experience and so on, then you ask yourself, number 2, the question is, do I actually need an employee or perhaps I only need a contractor? And that's a huge decision because there's obviously big differences between when you take someone on as a contractor or an employee. And there's a lot of rules around whether they actually are a contractor. You might think you're taking on a contractor and then find later that they're an employee. So that's definitely a big number 2. And the third thing is what you're going to pay them. You need to work out what legally you're obliged to pay them. And then from there, you actually also need to look at what you can afford to pay them. It may be that the bottom line of what you have to legally pay them is not something that you can afford, in which case you need to go back to the drawing board and wait a little bit longer before taking on that first employee. Or it may be that you just want to know what the bottom line is and then you have a room above that, so pay them a little bit higher so that you can make sure that you get the right kind of person.
I find that sometimes people think that the employee or their first hire should be able to do everything and they want them to basically replace themselves.
I definitely think they want them to do everything. Yeah. Sometimes they don't know what everything is. And I speak from experience here too, because I've had the same feeling of, what is it that you're going to get someone to do when you hire them? Yeah, there's a real risk that you want them to do everything and that you haven't properly articulated what the key things are that you need them to do. And if you have that idea, it's very common for a first hire to be someone in an admin type role. if you do take that on, then you kind of think, well, what are they going to do? Are they going to do the bookkeeping? Are they going to answer the phone? Are they going to do some social media marketing? And all of those things are really quite different skill set.
Absolutely. You mentioned 3 different jobs there as opposed to one. But as small business owners, we all do all of those jobs, so we think our hire can as well.
Exactly.
So you mentioned that they're the top 3. Would you think that having some procedures and some policies would be a really good idea?
Yeah, so those 3 things are the 3 things to do before you start looking for someone. The 4th thing I would do would be to go through the recruitment process and make sure that you've got a process sort of outlined in your head and down on paper as well. And then after you've actually gone through the recruitment process, before you actually have them start work, have a contract in place. And you may or may not, with that contract, want to have some kind of policies and procedures.
Okay, so that sounds good. So you touched on the fact that employees and contracts are different. So can you give us a quick indication of why they're different?
Sure. The simplest probably way to look at it is that an employee is working for you in your business to grow your business and to work in your business, whereas a contractor is someone who has their own business and who is ultimately aiming to grow their own business, and they're doing that by doing some work for you. An employee, for example, a position where someone is only working for you, then they more than likely, in the majority of cases, be an employee. If, however, they're someone who's working for multiple people, then there's more likelihood that they'd be found to be a contractor. And there's a number of different questions that you can ask yourself to make sure that you're finding out whether someone falls in the employee or the contractor lane. That little question about, are they running their own business or are they benefiting my business, is a really good starting point.
That's great. I've never heard it described like that, and that's very clear. Basically, if you're getting a bookkeeper come in for a few hours a week and they have multiple clients, then they would be a contractor. If you've got a part-time somebody coming in and they only work for you and on their off time they're a mum or a student or they just work those hours, then that way they would be more likely to be an employee.
Yeah, it's a really good rule of thumb. Of course, you will always have those odd situations. For example, there might be someone who's a bookkeeper who has 2 part-time jobs. It really does come into that idea of, are they running a business? You know, is that bookkeeper running a business or are they just working in your business?
Okay, so you could have a employee that has multiple part-time jobs, but they're not running a business per se. Okay, all right, cool. So that clears that up quite well. We've looked at working out what the job description is, then starting to think about recruitment. So is there any tips you can give people on what they should be asking and expecting in that recruitment sort of process? Maybe if we start with what they should be asking for advertising the position.
Sure. When it comes to advertising, this is another reason why it's so important to have done that job description, because it's really hard to write an advertisement asking to find someone if you don't know what it is that you actually want them to do. So having that job description right next to you is very, very helpful. And you can kind of tease out the key parts of the job description and make sure that you're making that really clear when you're advertising. What employers need to be really careful about with an advertisement is not to be misleading about what the role is, because you don't want to have people applying who aren't actually suitable for what you're looking for. You also want to be careful that you're not discriminatory in any way. That would include things like not saying something like you want a young person or you don't want an old person or you don't want someone who has kids, that kind of thing. And the same goes, of course, when it comes to actually face-to-face or telephone interviewing.
Okay, so with that sort of situation, if you're only able to pay the award rate for a junior, is there any way, without saying you only want a young person, that you don't have older people applying where you can't afford their award rate? So therefore it would be a waste of their time and your time without running the risk of discriminatory. How would you handle that kind of situation?
It's a really good question. I would advertise it as a junior level role. When you're hiring someone who's under that sort of 21-year age, you're looking for someone who's got very limited experience. So I would do that. I would say it's an introductory role, perfect for a junior.
Okay, that's a good way around it without being discriminatory, but then also not having a whole stack of people that really don't fit your criteria and wasting their time.
That's
so
right.
that's perfect.
And you could specify a pay rate range as well. So you could say the range would be between, $20 and $22 or something like that.
Okay, excellent. And then if someone older was to apply, then you could just let them know that that is the junior rate.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, excellent. Okay, so we've got our ad sort of sorted out about what we're going to do. What should we be doing next?
So the next thing is hoping that you get some applicants. And of course, then you need to shortlist them. Again, go back to your job description and make sure that you have got someone who's applying, who's ticking all the boxes. When it comes to the application, people are doing some really creative things these days. So some employers are asking for applicants to send in videos. So you actually get an idea of how someone presents. For example, if you're looking for a receptionist, you might want someone who speaks really well and really clearly and who has a nice manner when it comes to their voice. So having a video of them could be really helpful. Another thing that is really common these days is for people to be really specific with what they want someone to do when it comes to applying for a job. And this is particularly important when you're in a situation where you might have quite a large number of applicants. Make it easier for you to shortlist them. If you have a list of, say, 5 tasks that you want people to do and you want them to do it exactly those 5 things, then the people who don't do the 5 things, you just immediately rule them out. Something like that is really useful as well when you want someone who can follow instructions. So you're weeding out the people who, they read the fact that there was 5 things, but they just missed task number 3. And you can say to yourself, oh, well, they're not very good at following instructions. That's not the kind of person that I want.
Absolutely. And I've done that myself with hires, is I've asked them to email me, for instance, and then I've ended up with a whole stack of Facebook messages or telephone calls or that sort of thing when I've specifically said, I want you to send me your resume by email. So, yeah, that's a really good idea. I love the idea of a video too, because like you say, you can get an idea of how they present, particularly if you're trying to fit them into a larger team. If you already maybe have some staff and you need to get somebody who's going to fit in with that, it's a perfect idea. I hadn't thought of that, so that's excellent. Okay, so we've got our ad done. We're starting to do our shortlist. Now where do we go from there?
Then you have to interview them. Once again, that can be done in a range of different ways. You could just start with a simple telephone interview if you have a large shortlist, or you might want to go straight to face-to-face interviews, or perhaps you're going to be doing it online because the person might not actually be physically located near you. My whole business is run virtually. So everybody works at different locations, and that's becoming more and more popular these days. To make someone have to physically meet with you might just be, unnecessary. Again, I would prepare the interview before you have it. I would have a list of questions that you're going to ask each of the candidates. And then I would allow some time for just general chat as well to give you an idea of what that person is like and whether or not you like them.
Cool. Going along the discriminatory lines, there's some things that you can't ask a candidate, isn't there?
Yep, there definitely is, but it still happens all the time. Most common one that we hear of, and the one that's most personally that I have a problem with, is the number of women that get asked, oh, so do you have children? A lot of people will say, but we're just making general conversation. And yes, I can understand that. I would suggest that you try to have other kinds of general conversation. If it is the case that you need someone to work a certain number of hours or a certain number of days per week, and you're concerned that perhaps they might have children and have childcare responsibilities, the question that you actually want to ask is there anything that is going to stop you from being able to work? And then you insert the days of the week or the number of hours that it is that you want them to work. The fact that someone else might have a concern that an applicant is a parent and will need to take time off to be with sick children, perhaps, that's not something that you can actually ask questions about.
I guess that's also about marital status and that style of thing as well.
Yes, all the discriminatory reasons. Their marital status, their sexual preferences, their religious preferences and views, their political preferences, anything else that falls into that discriminatory category that we hear about so often, those questions can't be asked at interview.
Okay, perfect. So that's a good list for people to be aware of. Okay, so we've picked 1 or 2 candidates that we're really keen on. What do we do now?
Make a selection. And at this point, it's really just, going through all the hard data and also going with your gut feel. Make a selection, choose the candidate that you want, and then you have to make an offer. So I would put that offer in writing. You may want to do it first over the telephone because you might find that if it's taken you a bit of time that candidate has moved on and accepted a job elsewhere or is now for some other reason not available. Give them a call perhaps first and then send them a follow-up offer in writing. The offers that I recommend are really short, one-page, simple letters, simply stating, I'd like to offer you this position, this is the pay rate, these are the hours of work, this is the period of notice, that kind of thing. If the person accepts, then I would offer them a full contract of employment.
Okay, so in your offer, can you have a probationary period?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that works both ways, doesn't it? If they're on probation, the person can say, look, no, sorry, this doesn't suit me. And you can also say, for whatever reason, sorry, this hasn't worked out.
Yeah, and depending on what industrial relations system covers you as a small business, having a probationary period doesn't necessarily rule out the fact that if you decide to terminate during that probation period, that it doesn't stop them from being able to bring something like an unfair dismissal claim. But in the majority of cases, if you are deciding to terminate employment during probation, then unless it's a really bad situation, most of the time it's going to be fine for the employer to do that.
So is there any rule of thumb about how long the probation would be?
Average probation is 3 to 6 months. Some employers want the longer probation, the 6 months. Others are happy with 3. It really depends on the type of work that you're asking the person to do and how quickly you can assess their abilities to do that job.
Okay, cool. All right, so we've employed our employee. They've accepted our offer. We're all good. Now, is there anything that we should be doing after they've actually become an employee?
We want to make sure that in addition to accepting the offer that they've signed up to a full contract of employment, which would create some more detail around all of those basic terms. So it would set out the probationary period, and it might also have a comment in there. For example, you have a 3-month probation period and you haven't quite made up your mind whether or not they fit the bill. You might like the ability to extend the probation period. So you might have a clause like that in your contract. You would also have terms regarding how much you're going to pay them, the hours that they're going to work, how much notice you have to give if you do want to terminate the employment, and same goes for the employee. Depending on the kind of work they do, you might want some strong provisions around confidentiality. There might need to be restraint of trade provisions if they're going to be having close relationships with your clients, for example. So there's quite a lot of extra information that you would want to put into a detailed contract. And then once you've got them all signed up to that and they're happy and they've started, you really want to make sure their first day is a good one.
Excellent. That sounds like a really good tip.
Yeah.
So we've done all of that. What other things should we be looking at apart from pay rates? So this is our very first employee. We haven't had an employee before. So what other kinds of things do we need to be looking at paying that employee? And it's the employer's responsibility to cover.
This is definitely where I recommend that you get advice from your trusted bookkeeper or accountant. The obvious things that you'll need to take into account. So you will need to make sure that they have done a tax file declaration with you. You'll need to make sure that they have chosen a superannuation fund and advised you of who that is and filled in the appropriate form. So then you'll need to make sure that you are set up in terms of how it is that you administer your payroll, whether you're doing that through an online accounting system or doing it manually. And want to make sure the same is in place for deducting of tax and paying of superannuation and those kinds of things.
Perfect. Is there anything else that you think we should be aware of now that we've got our first employee?
Probably the biggest one that is often missed is record keeping. There are some really strong legislative requirements around what records you need to keep. There are the obvious ones, like the fact that you need to keep copies of contracts of employment. You need to keep detailed records of pay rates, and in many cases you also need to be keeping timesheets, for example, start and finish times, also break periods. If you fail to keep those records, there can be penalties if you end up being prosecuted by the government.
Yes, I heard of a bad story where a lady was working as a hairdresser. Her knock-off time was, say, 5 o'clock, but she wasn't picked up until 5:15
Yes.
each day. And because there wasn't a clear timesheet to say that she finished at 5, sometime down the track, she actually went for those extra 15 minutes every day. And it became very expensive for the small business. So, yes. All right. Excellent, Jo. That's great. So now what we do is we have the final 5, which is 5 questions that I ask all my guests. So are you game?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes, I am. I totally am.
Everybody gets really nervous for some reason. Okay. The best advice given to you by a mentor?
To invest in myself.
Fabulous. What is the biggest help that you have received since starting your business?
When I think of the best help, not necessarily the biggest help, but the best help has been the number of other business owners that I have relationships with. Being able to talk to them and share the trials and tribulations and excitement of running a small business has been fabulous.
Excellent. What is the one thing that you have to do every day, your non-negotiable?
Brush my teeth. That is definitely a non-negotiable.
Okay. What is your favourite business book and why?
Oh, I've got way too many. That one book that they perhaps not have heard of before. It would be a book written by Daniel Pink, and he's written quite a number of books, and the one that I'm referring to is called To Sell is Human. As a business owner, it was such an important book for me to read because it gave me a completely different perspective on the concept of sales. And as we all know, as business owners, it is absolute essential that we need to be able to sell. And what it stopped me from thinking was, the way so many do that, sales is icky or sales is like the car salesman. And it made me see it in a way that I could actually live with and be really comfortable with and enjoy sales as a result of reading that book.
Absolutely, because as small businesses, if we don't actually sell our services, then we can't help our customers. And if we're not helping our customers, then we won't have a business. So that's great. Yeah. Okay, and our final one is, what do you wish you had known when you started in business?
I wish I had known more about niching down services and identifying ideal clients.
Absolutely, because we want to help everybody, but if we're helping everybody, then we can't actually help anybody. The previous podcast on the Small Business Talk podcast was about marketing and about finding your right audience. So that dovetails into that perfectly. Well, thank you very much, Jo. Appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on. Is there any final words that you would like to add?
I would just like to tell everyone that hiring an employee can be so empowering for a business. It really is a chance to up-level. It is something that you want to make sure that you get right. Don't let it stop you from giving it a go, though. Definitely take the tips from today and try it at the right time for your business, because it can make such a powerful difference.
And if somebody would like to get your advice, find out more about you, or need help with employment law at all, where can they find you, Jo?
The easiest place is the website, which is just www.3dhrlegal.com.au.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Jo. Appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Cathy.
Don't forget to subscribe to Small Business Talk podcast and head on over to smallbusinesstalk.com.au/downloads for all the show notes and links to this episode. Remember, to be great, you must start. Pick one tip from today's episode, take action and implement it. Let's meet again next week at the same time and place. Until then, take action. And SBT community, enjoy your journey.